Welcome back to Echo Ridge and a short tutorial or maybe expose on a relatively new building called the Conduction panel. I decided to do this short video because I'm in the middle of a maximum difficulty achievement run and was presented with a problem. And the problem is the fact that these meteor blasters generate 2500 DTUs per second. And this is no matter if they're just sitting here or if they're actually targeting meteors. As a quick side note, if they don't have any blast shots in them, they won't be turned on per se, so they won't be generating that same amount of heat. Another reason why I wanted to play around with the conduction panel now is because since the last patch was released on August 3rd, they have made some modifications to the conduction panel itself. I had to go to the full patch notes in order to find it. I believe now it's operating the way Clay intended because they put it in the fixes section, where it simply states improved conduction panel heat transfer algorithm for stronger and more consistent conductivity. And oh boy have they. I'm looking forward to showing you what I found out. And as you can see, this meteor blaster is at 445 degrees and still climbing. This one was doing the same thing. You can see that it's wiggling its antenna around, which means it's generating that heat, according to the tooltip, but this one's not rising in temperature. And that is because I put a conduction panel behind it. Now, a lot of people are under the assumption that you have to connect them to a liquid pipe in order to equalize heat between the two buildings. In this case, it's a tile in a building. But without liquids going through it, they can still work just fine. The entire floor of my spaceport is built out of bunker tiles, which occasionally get some relatively cool meteors that hit it, which keep it somewhat temperature controlled. The first thing I wanted to try in some of these experiments is, instead of using a conduction panel, just using something like a liquid bridge. This is going to highlight why the conduction panel is unique in the fact that it can operate in a vacuum, whereas most other things require a background environment, such as a gas or a liquid. Another great aspect of the conduction panel is the fact that it's made out of a refined metal instead of a mineral like the liquid bridge. So I'm going to try something like sedimentary rock, just for the simple reason that it is somewhat thermally reactive. And the liquid bridge, as expected, is not having an effect. You can see the meteor blaster is still rising in temperature. My next question is whether or not the material the conduction panel is made of makes a difference. In this case, I have a gold conduction panel, steel, copper, and cobalt. Well, because they're all refined metals, they all have relatively high thermal conductivity. In fact, the copper and the gold are identical at 120. The cobalt actually has a thermal conductivity of 200, and the steel is the lowest with 108. So I'm going to try building one out of cobalt, except this time I'm also going to build it in reverse. Now, my theory is it doesn't matter where the input or the output is on the conduction panel, just so long as both sides are touching the building and the tile. And as the duplicate is just about to finish up this conduction panel, look how quickly that temperature drops. So I'm actually going to try to deconstruct it really quick so I don't lose all that beautiful heat so we can keep doing experiments. This time, I'm going to try to put it off to the side. And the reason why this might matter is because the meteor blaster's tile of interest is right here in the center. You can always tell a tile of interest because when you have the blueprint open and you move your mouse around, the tile that your mouse is stuck to is that building's tile of interest. The tile is also where the duplicate will interact with the building. But does it matter if the conduction panel is not aligned with the tile of interest? We're about to see. The duplicate's finishing it up and it does not matter. The heat is still being equalized with these diamond window tiles below it. Now, in the case of my specific colony here, this is exactly how I would leave it. I wouldn't run any pipes through it because, like I said, we get uranium or meteors that crash down on the bunker tiles and keeps it relatively cool. But because I want to go into a little bit more detail with the conduction panel, we're still going to do some more tests. First, I'm going to run this water pipe that is currently 93 degrees right through the conduction panel here and then right back. And I think we can be fairly certain that it's going to cause the building and the tiles that it's connected to all equalize at 93 degrees. Now, because this water is 93 degrees and the meteor blaster somehow was down to about 65 degrees, it's actually raising in heat to match the water. But interestingly enough, with the water going through the conduction panel, you can see that the conduction panel fluctuates in temperature pretty quickly. So I'm not sure what the devs did in the background, but the thermal conductivity of the conduction panel is not necessarily just this same 108, because normally temperatures don't fluctuate that quickly when everything around them is in a similar thermal threshold. Now let's head to the lab and do some experiments. We're starting this experiment off with 3 Thermium meteor blasters, all sitting on steel bunker tiles. I chose Thermium because it has a very high melting point and a high thermal conductivity, and what I'm going to do is brush 200 kilos worth of 1000 degree supercoolant in the same spot on each platform, with the idea being I want to get the meteor blasters all in the same temperature, or at least as close as possible. And then I'm going to remove the bunker tiles below it and put them right back. The reason why I'm doing this is because I want these bunker tiles to be sitting at the same 20 degrees. Now, the meteor blasters differ slightly in temperature just because of, chaos. This meteor blaster is at 840.5 degrees, this one's at 843, and this one's at 842. So for the next steps, I'm going to pause. And then I'm going to put 3 conduction panels down. Except I'm going to try to make sure that they are vary as much as possible in thermal conductivity. For the first one, we're going to use depleted uranium. The reason being, it has a thermal conductivity of 40, which is not really good compared to other refined metals. Next up, we're going to use steel, because it has a thermal conductivity of 108. And then finally, for the last one, we're going to use thermium, because it has a very high thermal conductivity of 440. Now, I suppose the theory is that the thermium conduction panel is going to do better than the steel, and the steel is going to do better than the uranium. And what I mean by better is it should equalize the temperatures between the bunker tile and the meteor blaster at different rates. But that may not be the case. So I'm going to unpause it, and notice that the temperature goes down very quickly. And now I've paused it back. We can see this meteor blaster is already at 630 degrees. The meteor blaster using the depleted uranium conduction panel is still sitting at 745, whereas the thermium conduction panel is already sitting at 410 degrees. Well, this experiment now confirms the fact that what you make the conduction panel out of matters quite a bit. And while the other meteor blasters are still working to equalize the temperatures between the bunker tiles and the meteor blaster, the thermium conduction panel is already complete. All the bunker tiles and the meteor blaster are all sitting at 153.7 degrees. One point that it's important to mention about the conduction panel, where we see that it's transferring from one side to the other, is that on a building itself, the little radiator piece still has to be connected to the building. So in this case, these bunker tiles are sitting at 20C and this meteor blaster is sitting at 834. And even if I put a bunker tile right here where the conduction panel is sitting, notice that the temperature transfer still doesn't occur. It's the building itself that has to be on the radiator. As soon as we do that, we can see the temperature quickly equalize. This is not the case with tiles though, as you will see shortly. What about a couple of other experiments? For instance, does the conduction panel work inside of a liquid? We'll go ahead and pause it. In this case, we're once again going to be using thermium because, well, this is magma, and you know how that goes. I'm just going to put the input for now inside of the magma and see what happens. And very quickly, the conduction panel skyrockets in temperature. For giggles, we're going to take a bunker tile that comes out at 20 degrees and put it at the other side, and you can see quickly that the bunker tile is skyrocketing in temperature. And considering this is in a vacuum, and that center tile of the panel is not touching any gas or liquid, we now know that the input and the output can transfer thermals across them regardless if anything is touching the little radiator-looking coil. That's pretty neat, huh? Let's try it again, except this time, let's put an insulated tile there. We'll start off with something obscene, like an insulated tile made out of insulation. My theory is this doesn't do anything, and the theory is correct. The insulated tile of insulation is not budging. Now let's use something a little less robust, like an insulated tile made out of sandstone. Ah yes, the insulated tile made out of sandstone is going up in temperature. It wouldn't take this insulated tile too long until it melted under the weight of the magma. So what about another use case? I'm going to take a bunch of insulated tiles and put them straight down onto the magma. I'm then going to take a conduction panel and put it across the insulated tiles. The conduction panel quickly raised in temp, so I'm assuming that as soon as we put something down here, like in this case, we'll try a copper heavy watt joint plate, it will quickly rise in temp, which it has. Now, the conduction panel itself says it can function in a vacuum. It also says it can be run through wall and floor tiles, as we've shown previously. So I'm assuming in an environment, it does the exact same thing. Literally just transferring the thermals from this oxygen tile over to this oxygen tile, which the experiment doesn't really tell us much because, you know, gases transfer thermals all the time regardless, but it at least shows that, yes, the conduction panel works in a standard environment as well. To highlight this further, we're going to build a box made out of solid insulation. And for those of you who did not know, insulation is the bee's knees and has a 0 thermal conductivity. It's that good. And then around it, just so I don't melt my entire lab, I'm going to build a larger box made out of nothing but insulation. And I'm going to fill the inside of the outer box with some very hot oxygen, using our wonderful heat gun found in the sandbox. I'm going to fast forward for a little bit until all the oxygen in here stabilizes. And I suppose that's decent. We're sitting at around 619 degrees on the outside of the little box and 25 degrees on the inside of the little box. This experiment is just to highlight once again that conduction panel don't care. It'll transfer wherever you want it to transfer. And as you can see, it's taking all those hot thermals from the outside of the box and injecting them right in it. Now, because it's a gas, it's going to take a little bit longer. Gases have a notoriously bad thermal conductivity, not to mention the fact that the mass is very small too. And just to highlight the point, I have fast forward quite a bit, and you can see that the temperature is rising. So I suppose that confirms the gas transfer as well. And I know I've been highlighting a bunch of examples of using the conduction panel as a way to equalize temperatures between its two sides, or between one building and another. But in a lot of use cases, you may want to pipe water through the conduction panel. And because of this fact, it doesn't make a lot of sense to use it inside of an environment, despite how good it is. And the reason why is because we already have something that does that. And that's by using radiant pipes. And by using radiant pipes, you're effectively doing the exact same thing. You're equalizing thermals from this side all the way through this side. And that's sort of the reason why the conduction panel is going to shine in a vacuumed environment. But don't kid yourself, this does pretty much the same exact thing. It just takes a lot more steps. Building a box, putting drywall behind it, add an environment, normally a liquid, and then putting a radiant liquid pipe to go through it. So really, not only is the conduction panel powerful, it's just really convenient. I know this was a short little video, but I really wanted to highlight the new and improved conduction panel, so that way you can be able to use it in your colonies to its maximum effectiveness. If you have any other questions about the conduction panel, or if you think I missed some tests that would have been worthy for inclusion in the video, please let me know down in the comments below. Also, if there are other buildings or systems that you'd like me to do one of these sort of expose type of videos on, please let me know that in the comments below as well. Until next time, much love, happy gaming, and I'll talk to you soon.